Right, Tony, you mentioned that you were a beneficiary of betting on Betfair in the previous part on the rugby and stuff, but you started working with them in 2002. Once again, you were in at the early point. That must have been glorious to be you were the PR, your press officer.
Yeah, I was head of media from 2003 to 2013 under Mark Davis's team. But I joined that. A guy called Peter Sellers rang me up in 2002. So this new company that's come out. It was around for 2 years beforehand, but it was very, very niche. And but he rang me up in 2002 and said this is going somewhere. So they were in Parsons Green then, really little offices. And he said, and he was heading up the telephone betting team. So he said, come along. And I was obviously working for, I was out of the industry then. So he come back in. It wasn't a lot to him. And he said, come back in on the telephone team. And it was, loading position, picking up the phone and stuff like that. But went there one night, which is not far from here, just on the, a few stops on the tube. And it was very, very similar to the early days of the Racing Post. It was kind of, it was a telephone team of about 15 to 20 people. And a lot of them were ex-City. They'd just been turfed out there. And they're just basically taking bets on the phone. But it was such a great, vibrant atmosphere. Again, it was very much a drinking culture. And there were some good people on there. One of the team leaders back then was Tom Morley, who has gone on to own a lot of racehorses with Robert Cow, Stuart Williams and stuff like that. We used to call him Posh Tom, and yeah, he was there, and there were some really other good people then. And obviously from 2000, because they were trying to build up their kind of like profile. After about a year or so, after they moved to Hammersmith, Mark Davies come and said, obviously a lot of people in racing, a lot of people in the media and stuff like that. So I went on board there, and again started from a pretty lowly position. And I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty, but yeah, it was the first year or so in that trading room, in taking bets and stuff, was quite eye-opening. And looking back now, I remember people like Johnny Herndl coming up. I mean, I don't know anything about him, but Johnny Lights. But I've heard of Johnny Lights then, because I remember when I was at the Racing Post, one of the first big features I did, and I'm probably blamed for all this, one of the first big features I did was on Harry Findlay. And we went round Ascot for a day with him, and he was like talking about Johnny Lights and stuff like that. But so when I went to Betfair and taking bets on Johnny Herndl over the phone, didn't even know who it was. But there were some really good people come on that phone then. Again, I'm sure a lot of people got chatting to them and things like that, and took inside information out of it. I personally didn't.
Well, you didn't jump on the phone when you got a lively person on?
No, not really. Not really. I'm not really like that, because it all comes back to the Racing Post and stuff like that. Look, if someone came on and said, look, this guy is absolutely fucking mustard, he's 10 out of 10 with his training and stuff like that, of course, yeah, you'd have a bet. But I don't readily recall that. I'm not one for kind of like betting on that information. If it tallies with what I think of the race, fucking happy days. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of underhand stuff used to go on back then over the phones. Yeah.
But I mean, being the sort of press, in charge of the press there, it must have been tremendous, because there was nothing negative at all, was there? Everything was positive.
No, on the total opposite. Because everyone got to rely. People don't remember some of they never really come out really. I mean, but it's been in the public domain. But no, back then, and I'm talking about 2000 and 2001. If you had a racing bet on Betfair, and it was a non-runner, you lost your money, because they didn't have a Rule 4 system in place. They didn't have a reduction factor in place. So when people in the press used to get the non-runners first coming through, people used to go on Betfair and just lay them.
I had no idea.
No. And honestly, back then, because there was no Rule 4 system in place, it's only when, I think 2002, when Burt came up with, and people still moan about the reduction factor system. Back then, if you laid a non-runner, you got your money, and the backers lost it. So, and every time the system every time the website crashed, we had the Racing Post on, because all the people at the Racing Post were betting on Betfair. They latched onto it any quickly. So if someone like you know, Millington or anybody like that was in a position at the time, an exposed position, and they don't know what's going on because the site went down, right on the phone. When's it coming back up? Any number of things. You know, there was, I was on holiday at the time and there was a tennis scandal. That was in 2006 where they ended up voiding a market. Can't even remember all the details of that, but that was the first time we've ever voided a market. That was all kinds of stuff. Every time there was a drifter, and we had it again to a certain degree, very recently with Desert Crown last week. You know, all the press, you know, saw it, Desert Crown drifting from 5.5 to 7. That, you know, rang up Stouty and, oh yeah, he's had a setback, not running. But back then, every single journalist was looking at Betfair anti-post markets, however liquid, was just looking for a story, and they were just saying, and then they'll, you know, they still hate ringing up the journalists. The journalists still hate ringing up the trainers and owners now when a horse drifts on an anti-post market, because a lot of the time there are some, you know, there's some false kind of like drifts and stuff. But so every time a big name horse drifted, journalists would get on the phone and just saying, how is it fair that people profiting from inside information? God, yeah, I would say it was, the press were overwhelmingly negative towards it, and there would be any number of ideas where they all loved it personally. But you know,
It's changed massively, isn't it? Because I remember being with people that were winning on Betfair, and they would have account managers who would invite them to the marquee at Cheltenham and places like that, and then it sort of turned around to what it's become. Yeah, was that when you were still there? Did it
I was still there. I mean, we used to host some kind of like debauched kind of like marquees at Cheltenham and stuff like that. I mean, literally everyone who was anybody would try to get in. I mean, I was, no, not because I looked like a thug. I used to kind of like help on the kind of like door, because there was a load of invites there and it was all a free bar. And we used to take massive kind of like marquees, and I had to turn away trainers who were turning up with 20 people looking for an easy place to get a drink. Because I don't know if you ever went in one of those Cheltenham marquees that we had. It was like plusher than plush. I mean, it was like unbelievable, the money they must have spent there. But yeah, there was so many kind of like things to it at Betfair. I mean, they didn't get a lot of credit because they did try to stamp out a lot of the stuff, because obviously if you're back in the land and people are like, oh, you're unlicensed layers, unlicensed bookmakers, I'm sure you still get that out there now when you're up and around. But you know, that my time there, Mark Davis primarily drove all the memorandums of understanding. You know, had it across all sports. I mean, when I left there, it went from naught to early 50s, and whether or not they are effective, I'm not so sure. But yeah, I mean, coming back to your question about the, you know, account managers and stuff like that. I mean, there was a time when, you know, I had one, because of the rugby stuff primarily. But obviously, I just said, look, I don't need that. But when you think back on it, people were making fortunes out of Betfair back then, more so then than now, because it was, you know, formative state. I imagine a lot of people you interview said the golden age of Betfair was between 2000 and 2010. And I found that with my rugby betting in the latter part of that decade. But when you think about it, why would you be inviting all the big accounts who win? And there was a magic moment in somebody who just said, look, why are we inviting all the winners? Why aren't we inviting all the losers? Because we need the losers more than the winners. Because all the winners are taking out of the ecosystem, aren't they? You want to kind of like, you know, compensate the losers as well, give them the day out and stuff like that, because there are a lot of people out there that, you know, that were losing a lot of money and winning a lot of money, and you know, that's, you know, we might come onto affordability checks or deal with it now. I mean, I haven't got any problem when I've been asked by I only really bet with free bookmakers anyway. I can't get on anywhere else, and I use other people, but I don't really bet as much now as I used to. But the affordability, if someone asks me to provide my bank details or, you know, give them a yearly company account if they want to read it, I haven't got any problem with that whatsoever. But I fully understand people are more secretive than me, more open. Fundamentally, I'm a very open person. Not on the stuff that I go out there and I'll just say what I think and I don't care who it upsets. But yeah, I'm a kind of like open book there. I mean, I understand people have privacy concerns, and I know a lot of good friends, and just say, look, if people ask me for anything, I'm not going to tell my wife or my partner this kind of stuff. Well, that's fine, but you've got to take. There is a wider responsibility there. I mean, affordability checks is a weekly show on its own right, but personally, I haven't got any problems with it. It clearly not been done ideally. It's not clearly not done well, but I think if the actual implementation was done a lot better, I wouldn't really have a lot of problems with affordability. But that's just me. I like saying I'm a very, very, very open individual, and I think that the losers and the big losers should be protected.
Right, we'll just carry on with Betfair a minute, and then we'll get on to the rest of it. So, obviously, you're freelance again now, but you still do stuff for Betfair.
Yeah.
So I understand if you don't want to say what you think
No,
necessarily.
but
what's your personal opinion on whether Betfair was a good or bad thing, ultimately, in hindsight?
100% a good thing. Giving punters even more so now. I think obviously with the restrictions and stuff, it's fundamentally a good thing. I mean, I get limited everywhere, and I think you just have to deal with it. But if I want to go on Betfair, and do what I do, then I can do. I mean, the problem I have, and obviously, and Betfair were one of the firms who asked me for my affordability details. They rang them up, and I went through it all. I said, look, whatever information you want, I'll give it to you. So one of the issues there is, well, I will say this now. I mean, if, for example, because I bet at big prices primarily. If I'm on a 50s and 33s and it's a big shortener, there was an occasion recently, a couple of months ago at Newbury. I latched onto one early, got it at 40s and 33s, and various few people, I managed to get about 200 quid each way on it at 40s and 33s. In itself, and when I was betting in the late kind of like 2000s, that wouldn't have been hardly a big position at all on a rugby match. I used to take, I used to have, fouls, winning, primarily winning, but I'd lost kind of like 4 figures in some rugby matches, but more consistently I won. Now, for example, if I wanted to lay back the horse in question, got fucking backed into 10s, got beaten a short head. But if I wanted before the race, if I wanted to take out, lay it at 12s or 13s, I think it went off around about that. If I wanted to lay back 400 quid at 11 or 12, and the horse won, I'll be bollocks because I've lost £4 in one bet. And they'll be asking me to say, look, and that would be massively out of kilter with my taking a £4 position. And even if I provided in details of other bets I've had, now that's going to be problematical because a lot aren't in my own name, and the ones that were wouldn't particularly cover the £4 loss. So I'm having to take a position and stay with it now rather than laying off. Obviously, you're putting in running lays and things like that, but that's one of the ways that the affordability checks have affected me, my betting, not my openness. But yeah, I think it's great. I mean, Betfair is, again, it's been a brilliant. I'm lucky to be there actually, and I'll tell you this story because I think Millington wrote about it in print once, and someone asked me about it for the weekend, and this was quite a funny one, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised I still had the job afterwards. It's very early on. I think it was 2003, 2004 at Cheltenham, and back then, money was quite tight with Betfair. So they put you in a bed and breakfast, and I think I was bunking up with a guy called Ray Farrell, very Irishman in the very early days of Betfair. Anyway, on the last night at Cheltenham, I'm not even sure, when was it a 3-day festival at Cheltenham? If it was 2003, 2004, it was still 3 days back there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think it might have been the Thursday night, but it was the last night anyway. So I went out and had a big one. It was still another day to come. So I went out there, and 3 o'clock, I was sitting in the Queens and stuff like that. And I was obviously still with someone at the time, but anyway, I'll tell you now. I'm sure my boys haven't heard it, you're just about to, lads. So anyway, I ended up pulling a student in the Queens at 3 o'clock one night. Anyway, so I went back to her digs. I don't think anything happened. Anyway, I went back to her digs anyway. So I woke up in the morning and I was like very early, 6 o'clock or whatever. And I was still massively hungover. Anyway, so I just put on my strides, had some coins in my pocket, left my phone there, left my keys there and everything. And I just went across the road to get a racing post, just as they were opening up. So anyway, so I stumbled out of there, just had a shirt on thing, a few quid in my pocket, but I think I even left my wallet, my phone and my keys there anyway. Anyway, well, I just popped across the road, no problem. Probably shouldn't have done because she could have robbed me. But so I went across the road, get a racing post before I just like wandered back into town or whatever. And there wasn't one there. So I asked them, when's the next newsagent? He said, around the corner. Oh no, sorry, they haven't been delivered yet. I went on to the fourth one till I found it. Now, as soon as I got the paper in my hand and walked out the shop, I was literally horrified. I had no idea where she lived because I've gone round Cheltenham and I couldn't find where it was. So the situation was, I rang one of my brother's companies and they're kind of like transport department. I said, keep on ringing my phone because I need to get the details there. And like I said, I was so basically she wasn't answering. I tried ringing up and stuff like that, and I was just sat in a boozer all day, and I just got drunk, and they like that. And I'm not joking. I was just like resigned to failure. At 5 o'clock, she's walked in a bike, student, into this pub, and I've never been so happy to see anybody in my life before or since. And I just said, why don't you fucking pick the phone up? And it was like, she said, I didn't like to answer. And there was like 100 of missed calls when we went back to her house and stuff like that. And I always remember I was drunk enough then. I got so drunk after. And then Bruce Jackson picked me up. I was slumped in a telephone box near Montpellier, and he picked me up and dropped me home when I was just living around the corner then. So we totally missed the last day of Cheltenham. Bruce actually went to the digs or wherever my stuff was and picked that all up for me. So yeah, I was very lucky to survive the first 2 years at Betfair.